it anymore. Okay, finally we made it to the last speaker, that is Layal. She is fascinating by viruses and by how the body protects itself from virus infections. And she's also volunteering for Science Oxford, right?
Yeah.
So she does other kind of public engagement as well. And today, she will talk about sensing viruses, the alarm system in our cells. So let me hand it to her.
So viruses have a pretty bad reputation, which is fair enough. They can cause devastating diseases with huge humanitarian and economic implications. But there's something simultaneously fascinating about viruses. They're so simple, but yet they can cause such complicated diseases which are often difficult to treat or for which we have no cure. So this is why I'm really fascinated by them, and hopefully I'll convince you that this is amazing. And, so yeah, they're really simple, but they can cause these complicated diseases. So what are viruses? Well, viruses are kind of like fancy chocolates. They have a protein shell on the outside, but the good stuff is on the inside. And that's their genes. So viruses have genes. We've heard a bit about genes. They have genes just like us. Our genes are made of DNA. With viruses, it's a little less straightforward. So some viruses make their genes out of DNA, but other viruses use a sister molecule of DNA called RNA. And DNA and RNA are collectively known as nucleic acids. And these molecules are fascinating in their own right, because they are the stuff of life. Without them, we wouldn't exist, but neither would viruses. And this is no accident on the part of the virus. So viruses actually use their nucleic acids to hijack our cells. When viruses invade our cells, they inject their nucleic acids, their genes, into our cells. And genes are basically a set of instructions. They tell our cells how to make stuff. Sorry for the simplistic thing, I know a geneticist is in the audience, but they tell our cells basically how to make stuff. So without them, we wouldn't exist, as I said, and neither would viruses. And what happens when the virus invades us is it tries to instruct our cell, using the genes as instructions, to tell our cell what to do. So in the same way that these genes are really important to the virus, our genes are important for us. So our genes make us. They contain all the instructions needed for every single cell and every single organ of our body to do its job and keep us alive. Our genes make us, but like I said, virus genes make viruses. Or more specifically, virus genes tell our cells how to make viruses. So that's because viruses can't actually reproduce on their own. Outside of our cells, they're not even alive. They're just a dead bit of protein with some nucleic acid in the middle. But this is viruses have all the instructions, the genes needed to make more viruses, but they lack the machinery needed to actually carry this out. So in this way, a virus is kind of like a blueprint. If I gave you a blueprint for a house or a building, you'd have an idea of what that building would look like, but it's not a building, right? You wouldn't be able to actually build it unless I gave you some materials and machinery. And our cells, unlike viruses, do contain the machinery needed to make stuff. And so when a virus invades one of our cells, that's when it comes to life. The virus injects its genes into our cells, and these give the cell one clear instruction: make more viruses. They tell the cell, stop doing what you're doing, stop making nice, blood or whatever, and start making virus proteins so we can build more viruses. And these viruses accumulate in the cell, and some of them even burst the cell open in a huge explosion, releasing many more viruses into the body, where they spread and make us sick in the process. So far, I've made it sound as if viruses have quite an easy time, right? Like they just barge into our cells and take over. But luckily for us, it's nowhere near that easy for the virus. So viruses actually have a really difficult time. I'm not trying to make you feel sorry for them, but our cells are actually a really hostile environment if you are an invading virus. And that's because we have these alarm systems in all of our cells. And this system recognizes invading viruses, and in response, it activates our immune system, which will attack the virus. So my PhD research is all about understanding how viruses are detected and then dealt with by our immune system. And in our lab, to understand this, we study many different viruses. So, for example, we study HIV, flu virus, and Zika virus, just to name a few. But what these viruses have in common is that they're all united against one enemy, and that is our immune system. So we hope that if we can understand how our immune system detects viruses at this very, very early stage, just after they've invaded the cell, then we might be able to boost these responses using a drug or vaccine, for example, in the future. So I'll tell you a bit about what we know so far, and then give you a sneak preview into my PhD, which I've just started in October, so no pressure. So I told you that viruses inject their nucleic acids, their DNA or RNA, into our cells. But what I didn't tell you is that our cells are actually filled with proteins called sensors, which recognize these nucleic acids from the invading virus and then activate the immune responses I was talking about. So these immune responses are really potent, and I like to use an analogy of a house or building on fire. So let's imagine that in this room there was a fire. It starts over there, and that fire is going to produce smoke, which is kind of moving into the room. And in exactly the same way, when a virus invades the cell, it releases its nucleic acids, its genes, into the room, into the cell. And just like we hope there's a smoke detector which would detect that smoke and activate an alarm in the room, in the same way in our cells, the nucleic acids coming from the virus would be sensed by these protein sensors, and they also activate alarms in our cells. So now it's an emergency, right? We're panicking, there's a virus here, we need to do something about it. So this is the equivalent of us hearing the alarm and we're calling 999. We're obviously staying calm, but we're calling 999. Now the fire brigade arrived, thank goodness. In our cells, the fire brigade is an antiviral protein called interferon. And interferon gets its name from its ability to block or interfere with virus infection. So basically, scientists are not that creative with names of proteins. But what interferon does is that it activates a whole bunch of other proteins, which it's like the firemen and women that come together and fight against the virus. And they basically stop the virus in its tracks. Once those proteins are activated, it's done. And another nice thing that interferon can do is that it can warn surrounding cells that the virus might be coming. So it's a bit like us having sprinklers or fire doors which would stop the spread of the fire through a building. In the same way, it can tell other cells, like, look, there's a virus here, it might come for you. And they can kind of prepare their weapons in advance, so that when the virus comes, it stands no chance, right? So this is one strategy, interferon. But there's another strategy that cells use to fight against virus infection, which sounds a bit weird, but they commit suicide. So this is no longer a fire analogy, by the way. So our cells can commit suicide, and it sounds bad, but it's actually a good thing. Because if you think about it, your body's filled with loads of cells. I don't know what numbers, there are trillions, I don't know. But there are many cells in the body, and if one of them gets infected by a virus, that's quite bad for that cell. But if it commits suicide, then it limits the spread of the virus. Because as I said at the beginning, viruses need our cells to reproduce. So if you get rid of the cell, you're basically getting rid of the virus factory, and so preventing the spread of the virus to the rest of the body. So interferon and cell suicide are two really good strategies against infection. But there's kind of a problem, which scientists, and in my lab as well, we've been kind of struggling with this for a really long time, which is how do our cells tell the difference between these nucleic acids that are coming from the virus and our own genes, our own nucleic acids, which are in the cell all the time. It might sound kind of trivial, but we wouldn't want to activate a false alarm. You wouldn't want, I mean, I lived in like student halls in London. It was so annoying, like all the time the fire alarm would go and you'd be like, ah, and then it's like, oh, it's just someone's like, I don't know, smoking inside or like burnt toast or whatever. So false alarms are annoying in our lives. And even worse, if you call the fire brigade, they come all the way, it's inconvenient. That's quite annoying. But in our cells, it's actually catastrophic if you activate a false alarm, because you're basically activating your immune system, and then there's no virus to fight, and it kind of turns on yourself. So that's how people develop autoimmune diseases. So it's actually really important to understand how our cells tell the difference between nucleic acids from viruses and our own. And in our lab, we've recently discovered a new way that cells can tell the difference, and it turns out to be related to shape. So you guys have probably all seen the structure of DNA. It's like on all the biology textbooks and stuff. It has this nice ribbon structure, the double helix. Oh, wow, perfect! I didn't even need this whiteboard. So this beautiful structure. But it turns out that DNA and nucleic acids in general can actually change their shape. So there's that nice ribbon shape, but they can also take another shape, which is kind of like jagged zigzag shape. And it turns out that these zigzag nucleic acids are actually a sign of virus infection. So they're associated with the viruses, whereas this nice shape is associated with our normal healthy cells. And so that's one way that cells can tell the difference. And we found a protein in cells which recognizes those zigzag nucleic acids, and in response, it activates cell suicide. So I spend a lot of my time looking down the microscope at cells dying. It's so fun. Like when I put the virus, and then it seems obviously the cell's dying, but it's protecting the rest of the cells there, because now that cell's dead, the virus can't replicate, and so you're healthy again. So understanding this, we hope. I wanted to first say that during my PhD, I want to kind of better understand this, because this is kind of just an early finding. But also, I want to see how many viruses this applies to, because at the moment we've seen it with flu virus, but it would be interesting to see if this applies, if this is sort of a broad feature of many different viruses, that they have these weird shaped nucleic acids. Because if that's the case, then it would be an interesting target for a therapeutic, like a drug or even a vaccine. And it would be exciting because it may work against many diseases. And talking of diseases, I think this work is not only important for understanding viral diseases, but also autoimmune diseases, which I mentioned. So these false alarms, when things are kind of going wrong, if we understand how our cells tell the difference between nucleic acids, we might understand what's going wrong in those people who have autoimmune diseases. And I'll tell you about one more disease and then I'm done, and that's cancer. So it turns out that cancer cells, when they die, actually set off these explosions where they release their DNA, their nucleic acids, into the body. And these same sensors that I've been talking about can recognize that DNA or nucleic acid from the cancer cell and then activate our immune system against the cancer. So if we understand how our cells recognize these nucleic acids, we could also harness this maybe in a new way to fight cancer. So I hope I've convinced you this is really cool, and next time someone sneezes near you, just think of it as a fire drill for your cells.